And hi to everybody in the live internets. Thank you for joining us. I'm really thrilled to be here. What I'm going to do is go through sort of three parts of my presentation, very informal presentation, so use that word loosely. The first part, I'm going to talk about my experience with grief and loss. And again, as Nancy said, this is very personal to me. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical professional or a mental health professional. So these are just some of my experiences and how that experience with grief and loss has impacted my health and my mental health in particular, and some of the things that I've learned about dealing with that grief and loss over the last 25 years. And then the last part, I'm going to talk about the Motherlove Project and why I started this account and the stories that we've posted, and then we're going to get into a Q&A. And so if you have questions or comments, please feel free to include them in the chat. I'm very open to questions. I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have. So the first thing I want to say is I just want to express gratitude to Nancy for inviting me to do this, and to the Ottawa Birth and Wellness Center for facilitating these conversations. Discussions about grief and loss are very difficult conversations to have. And so it takes a lot of courage to show up for them. So I'm really grateful to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about my experiences with you. So as Nancy said, my name is Janet Gwilliam-Wright. I am a queer cisgender woman. I have two amazing daughters. My partner Megan and I have been together for about 20 years, which just makes me old. And I am a proud public servant, and I am really very just grateful to be able to kind of launch into this project off the side of my desk, I guess, last year. So I want to take you back to 1990. It was a long time ago. I was 13. My mother, Cass, was diagnosed with breast cancer. And at that time, nobody really talked about breast cancer at all. It was still quite taboo. A lot of people didn't really understand breast cancer or how it should be treated. My mom had a range of treatments, and we felt very positive that her cancer was in remission. And the sort of gold standard for breast cancer is 5 years of non-recurrence. And unfortunately, she just missed the 5-year mark. In 1994, she was re-diagnosed with breast cancer, and it actually returned in her liver and then proceeded to spread everywhere. I was in grade 12 at the time. My family's from Vancouver. I grew up in Vancouver. It was probably the most difficult year of my life up until that time. The fact that my mother was dying was not really discussed at all in my family, and that made her eventual death very, very traumatic. She died on June 17th, 1995. It was the day I graduated from high school. And I've talked about that day as the worst and the best day of my life. It was the day that my adult life started, that I felt my adult life was starting. I was going to university, and the day that my actual life ended. I think that's not putting too fine a point on it. There were a variety of losses that happened that day. It wasn't just my mother's death that happened that day, but my family died as well. My mother was the glue that held my family together. Her death meant that the family that I had known, as dysfunctional as it was, no longer existed. The life that I thought I was going to have also no longer existed. And I didn't understand this as an 18-year-old, and nobody talked to me about it. I think that was probably the most traumatic part, was the grief was so overwhelming and so isolating, but it was so unspoken at the same time. I was meant to just kind of carry on. I wrote my grade 12 final exams 2 weeks after my mom died. I went to university 2 months later. It was as if nothing had happened, that I was meant to carry on and go forward, when in fact my entire world had just imploded. Um, my grief was so overwhelming, and I had no tools to deal with it. I had no resources. I had no community. Um, I want to take you back, some of you, to 1995. The internet didn't exist at that time. There was no grief community to be a part of. And so the toll that this took on my mental health, was very severe, and I didn't know what was happening to me at that time. I threw myself into my university work. Schoolwork was something that had always been my kind of coping mechanism, and I just doubled down on that. Just the perfectionism, I just ratcheted that up and sort of threw myself into my university work. And I wasn't able to really process the grief that I was feeling, at all. Um, the fact that the pain and anger and sadness that I was feeling wasn't acknowledged or dealt with, wasn't something new in my family. That was how my family operated. So to have to put that away, was what was expected of me. Um, I was meant to just get on with it. Um, that pattern of workaholism, suppressing all the stuff that had happened to me, up until that point, the anxiety that I felt, the trauma around my mom's death, really kind of culminated, when I turned about 24, 25, and I was diagnosed with depression. Um, I hadn't had any help for my mental health issues until that time. My anxiety was so overwhelming, and I had to finally take a break from school. I had been in school the entire time. I didn't take a break for 6 years. Um, I did 3 degree programs back to back. News alert. It's not a very good approach. At least it wasn't for me. I struggled, very, very much. And I was in my second year of my PhD program, and the bottom really fell out of my life. My depression and anxiety was so severe that I couldn't really function at all. And I had to, drop out of my program. Hindsight, being what it is, that was actually a really, good thing for me. It felt like the end of the world at the time. Um, but now it it feels like that was the right thing to do. My body was telling me, you have to stop. This isn't working. You can't push yourself so hard. But all of that grief and anxiety and trauma and shame and pain and everything that I had been carrying with me through my adolescence and into my adult years, had gone unresolved and undealt with and unprocessed. And so it kind of all came crashing down around me. And that was, for somebody who thought of herself as very high functioning, very well put together, was so, so hard. And that actually kicked off about 10 years of really difficult mental health struggles, a lot of bouts of depression and anxiety, a lot of different medications, a lot of different therapies, a lot of different approaches. Nothing seemed to work consistently. Um, and I credit my partner, Megan, for keeping me alive, through those years. She really, helped me to continue to go on. In 2015, After another really severe bout of depression, I found cognitive behavioral therapy through therapists here in Ottawa. I'm very, very fortunate to know and work with. And through working with her, I finally got the tools and resources that I needed to learn how to deal with my anxiety. And my anxiety is something that I have struggled with since I was a child, and it went undiagnosed and untreated for most of my life. And so coming to terms with some of the things that I dealt with growing up and the family system that I grew up in has really enabled me to find the tools and resources that I need to manage my own mental health. And so I'm really um, so grateful for the work that I've been able to do with this therapist over the last 6 years. It's really enabled me to have a healthy physical and mental health, a healthy life. Um, Last year, on June 17th, was the 25th anniversary of my mom's death. And I felt like I really needed to do something productive with my grief. I've been carrying my grief like we talk about with our children, our emotional backpack. Mine's been pretty heavy most of my life. And my grief is something that I've been carrying with me for a very long time. And I thought there has to be other women out there who have similar experiences to me, other daughters who self identify as daughters, who want to share um, their stories. There never really was an opportunity for me to share my story and connect with other people who had shared similar stories. And 25 years felt like a really significant milestone. And because of the choices that were made by my family, I have nowhere to grieve my mom. There's no headstone, there's no memorial. Um, so I decided that I would create a virtual place to grieve her, to honor her, to give other women an opportunity to honor their own moms as well. The one thing that people don't really tell you when somebody significant dies in your life is that nobody really talks about them anymore. And it's so, so hard when you're the person that wants to talk about them, when you don't have anybody around you who wants to honor their memory with you in a significant, regular way. It becomes very difficult. And so you talk about them less and you talk about them less, and eventually you don't talk about them at all. And that felt really, really bad for me. And so after years of not talking about my mom at all, even with my girls, really didn't bring her up. I mean, there are pictures in our house, but I don't really talk about her that much. This project has given me an opportunity to talk about her and to connect with other people. So I just decided I would start a website and an Instagram page, and I just put it up on Instagram. And I said, if you are interested in sharing your story, please send it to me, and I will post it. And to date, we've the site's had over 6,000 visitors. I've been so privileged to publish over 46 stories from women from diverse cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and religious backgrounds, women from South Africa, Europe, Canada, the United States, and South America, women who are very different and yet share something so powerful in common. And what this community has done is has connected me to so many people all around the world who really understand what I've been through and can normalize for me some of the feelings that I still have about losing my mom so long ago, feelings that I didn't know that I was still struggling with, or I knew I was still struggling with and didn't really have anybody to talk to about. So the fact that these feelings are normal and real and can connect us to other people is so, so powerful. It certainly has been for me. And I want to share an excerpt of the last story that I posted from Tracy Herbach, who's a journalist in the United States. And her story is very powerful. And Tracy writes, when my mom was working as an Associated Press reporter in Dallas, then New York, and finally South Asia, she would flit back to our small town when it was convenient. This went on for years. I went months or even years without seeing her. And then she died when our helicopter hit a mountain in Afghanistan. Forgiving the dead is no easy feat. There's no apology forthcoming. And this is a big hurdle to get over. To be sure, it didn't happen overnight either. Forgiveness came after countless fights with my husband over fun marital topics such as money, child rearing, and quotidian household chores, the ones that seem to increase tenfold once a baby comes into the mix. My mom and I both had babies before we were ready, but I was lucky enough to have one with a partner who wanted to stay, even when things were hard. Perhaps she couldn't do the single parenting thing. She didn't want to get stuck in that small town, working a job she had no interest in. That life wasn't for her. Maybe she wanted to get a bit more stable in her career and financial situation before she started coasting. I'll never know. The last time I visited my grandmother in her rural Colorado town, I took my son and his baby sister to my mom's grave, the one I desecrated a long time ago. It was dark from cloud cover and rain, a fitting atmosphere. Her name on the stone stared back at us. I wish she didn't die so I could get to know her, my son said. He has an unusual emotional maturity for his age. I do too, I said, and we left the cemetery. This is just one story. The most powerful thing that has come from this project is a connection to a grief community that I never even knew existed. When my mom died, as I said, I had no support, no connection to a wider group of peers who told me what I was feeling was normal and that it would get easier. There was a path through my grief, and that the mixed emotions I had about my mom's death were so normal. I carried a lot of guilt and shame about the negative feelings I had towards my mom after she died. Things I never felt like I could express them until 25 years later as a grown woman myself. It took me until middle age. I'm 44 now. It's the same age my mom was when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. It took me this long to be able to publicly express the fact that my mother was not a saint. And sanctifying her after her death was very damaging for my mental health. And I think that this is something that's very common when our mothers die, when our parents die. We forgive their faults and we forget the things that have happened that are damaging to us because we don't want to speak ill of the dead. I just want to conclude by saying that mothers come in all shapes and sizes, genders and sexualities. The loss of a mother figure is so profound, can really shape the course of a person's life. It certainly did for me. And Julia, I don't know if you want to show the montage that you have before we take questions. Thank you. That was so beautiful. I loved it. It made me very teary. So that's all the presentation I have, Nancy.
That was wonderful. And Janet, you're so generous to share your story with everyone. I just want to let people know how I found Janet. And if my internet becomes unstable, I'm going to turn off my video because I'm going to do everything I can to maintain connection. And I want you to know that it's not, I'm still here, but my video might not be. So how I found Janet was my mother passed away on Mother's Day 25 years ago. And on the 25th anniversary, I was feeling it. I don't have, or I can't speak for you, but for me, I don't have family that is mourning with me. And I have family that is sharing that story. Okay. I think my video is breaking up.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to turn my video off.
Turn your video off. I can hear you perfectly.
And hopefully that will be.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to find something to help connect me to my mom and to feel connection in my grief. And the Motherlove website was exactly that. And what I loved about the Motherlove website is my mother wasn't perfect. She had mental health concerns. There were other difficulties. And I found other stories that I related to. And I really hear you when, you know, after your mom has passed away, you tend to idolize. And my mom wasn't there when I had my kids, and I pictured her as the perfect grandmother. So I just love connecting with the stories. And another thing that I loved that Janet said to me, I said to her, I wasn't ready to share my story. It still felt very raw. And Janet said to me, you know what, take your time and share your story when you're ready. And to hear that, I just loved it. My story will be coming. The other message that I loved from Janet is that grief doesn't have an end. A lot of times our grief has a timeline. You know, your parent or someone in your life passes away, and 6 months later, people are expecting you to finish grieving. Where with me, 25 years later, I can still access that loss and that pain. So I just can't say enough about this website. I do have some questions for you, Janet. So
please fire away.
You touched briefly on this, but how was grief and loss dealt with in your family?
Oh, it wasn't. we didn't do that. So I mean, I did kind of like gloss over it, but like the fact that my mother was dying wasn't even acknowledged in my family, literally until the day that they wheeled her out of our house in a stretcher to go to palliative care. She died 2 weeks later. So, I mean, I say this in a very matter-of-fact way, but my parents were in such deep denial, almost right up until the end, that there was no planning, there was no forethought, there was no, there were really no plans, there was no discussion in place for the fact that our lives as we knew them were about to come to an end. And there was no opportunity for me to have the conversations that I wanted to have with my mom. Like, I was 18, I didn't know, you know, all of the bazillion questions that I needed to have answered, that I needed to talk to her about. There just wasn't any kind of space for that. And then after she died, there really was no space to grieve together as a family. It was like we had the funeral, and then that was it. The grieving was to happen completely separately, privately, individually. There was no kind of collective processing. But I think that's very much the way my family dealt with any kind of like negative emotions. Was we either denied it existed, we dealt with it with anger, or we just kind of did it superficially, kind of in a performative way, and then we just were expected to put it away. So that's how I was expected to kind of grieve and do the kind of performative, like, good daughter, responsible eldest daughter kind of bit. There was no discussion about what kind of ginormous impact this was actually going to have on me and my life.
That sounds really invalidating. And at that age, 18, you're really taking your cues from the adults in your life and kind of doing things the way they're doing things. Do you have any suggestions for others that are going through something similar, or ideas about what could have made the experience less traumatic for you?
Yeah, so acknowledging that it's actually happening is the number one thing that I would say. Like, actually name what's happening, and the fact that it is very scary. It's very destabilizing. But that the emotions that are coming up, there's so many emotions that are happening at the same time: fear, anger, resentment. I mean, we talk about the 7 stages of grief. I think understanding, not necessarily knowing exactly what those stages of grief are, but understanding that people are going to cycle through various emotions at various times, and that's all normal. It's normal. It's acceptable to grieve how you want to grieve. Put supports in place, especially for your kids. To have access to mental health supports, I think, is very important. And often this can come through like a cancer society or a palliative group. They often have mental health resources attached to those programs for families who are going through the loss of a loved one. I think what I have learned through doing this project is that, my experience was with my mom having cancer, but, women have lost their mothers to drugs and alcohol, through abandonment. Tracey's experience is one that really stood out for me. Suicide, where that loss is not, it's sudden. And I think that's it's so difficult to be able to deal with that kind of sudden loss. So you can't prepare for it. You can't prepare for any kind of loss like that, because grief just doesn't work that way. But I think really recognizing what's happening to your family, acknowledging what's happening, talking about it openly, talking with the person who, if you have an opportunity to talk to the person who's dying, talk to them about what their wishes are, talk to them about all of the things that you're scared about. Have those difficult conversations, lean into the difficult conversations. It's hard, but it's worth it.
I love that. And part of your project really is giving people language to talk about their grief, and also providing those resources. And I'm just thinking back to when our moms passed away. I wasn't even aware of any resources. I don't even believe I met with the social worker at my mom's hospital. It was I think things have really developed over the past 20 years, for sure.
Yeah, there are a huge number of resources now. I think what's so interesting to me is that we have a huge number of resources now that we didn't have before. I don't know if you ever read Hope Eelman's Motherless Daughters book, but I was given that book. I think she published it like the year after my mom died. So, in 1996, I think was when it first came out. So that was really the only book that I knew of that really spoke to an experience that I had gone through. I had a bit of counseling, but honestly, and I had an amazing counselor at that time, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to kind of carry me through that trauma at all. I think that there are enormous resources now that are available online and also in local communities. And I've tried to pull together ones that I have found personally really helpful, or other people have told me have really helped them. And also resources, particularly for those of us who are in Canada that are more culturally appropriate. So Indigenous mental health resources, resources for Black women and women of color are on the site as well. So I've tried to pull together ones that I think are a little bit more diverse. But you're right, Nancy. Like when our moms died, there was nothing. There was literally nothing. There was no internet. There was nowhere to go to find resources. And being young, it's really hard. Like I had friends whose mothers had also died, but it wasn't something that we talked about. We talked about it a little bit, but it's really hard to create that community when there isn't that much public discussion of grief and loss. I think that we have more public discussion of grief and loss now than we did before.
That's true. I'm familiar with Facebook. I think her first one was Mother Loss. Was that the title of her? I know she has a book about mother loss.
Hope Edelman's book. Yeah, it's called Motherless Daughters. Yeah.
Motherless Daughters. And I also was looking on your website. I really encourage everyone to go onto the website and look at the resources because you do a wonderful job of summarizing. And when I read each description, I was like, oh, I have to read this book. This sounds fantastic. So I really encourage people to look at that.
Thank you.
I really got a sense of how your grieving impacted your mental health. And I was wondering, what lessons have you learned over the last 25 years that could help people struggling with depression and anxiety?
Yeah, thank you. I went through a variety of kind of talk therapy therapists at various points. I mean, I've been in therapy for most of the last 20 years. It just wasn't as effective as I think I wanted it to be, because I was having sort of regular bouts of depression, I would say every 3 to 4 years. And my anxiety was always like off the charts. I would call it like chart topping, because it was just so unmanageable most of my life. And so when I started to learn about cognitive behavioral therapy and what that was and what it could do for me, and I started to get into this practice with the therapist that I work with now, it was nothing short of life-changing. Like, it is such hard work. It really is. But it's something that has really helped me to manage my anxiety and to kind of bring down the fight or flight response that I've always had. And I think that the other things that I've learned as an adult are the power of movement. Any kind of movement is really amazing. Exercise is amazing. It doesn't have to be like, run a marathon. It's like any kind of movement can really help the central nervous system to kind of better regulate itself. There's all kinds of health benefits to movement and exercise, but the mental health benefits I have really, really learned over the last kind of 5 years. And I would say meditation and mindfulness as well. It's kind of cliche to say, but when things are tough in my life, when I'm having a difficult time at work, or things are really stressful, or I feel, kind of uneasy emotionally, I go back to trying to meditate, even if it's like for 3 minutes, 4 minutes a day, because I really find that it really helps to regulate my central nervous system. And the other very uncool thing that I've learned is sleep. Not too much caffeine, which is what I'm still working on, and good food. Like, these are things. The thing for me that I've realized in my own management of my mental health, symptoms is I need to have a good schedule. Like, if my schedule gets not great, or I used to travel a lot for work, that was just hellish on my mental health. My sleep was off, my jet lag was bad. Like, it would just wreak havoc on my whole system. So I think having like a regular sleep schedule, like sleep quality is really important, food quality is really important, and just watching what the signs are for you. Like, I know what the signs are for me when my mental health starts to get a little not so great. And those are red flags for me. And I go, oh, okay, like I need to do something different. And everybody's are different. So just, I think understanding, like tuning into what that is for you and understanding what kind of strategies you can put in place to help yourself get back into a more regulated space. That has really, really helped me over the last 5 years.
I really love those ideas. And I made a list as you were talking, and I'm thinking we should post this underneath your talk. And what I really love about your ideas is they're affordable. They're a lot of them are simple and accessible to people, right? Like sleep, meditation. You can find apps that offer meditation for free and mindfulness. You mentioned watching your signs, so becoming familiar with your triggers and your red flags that things are increasing. And then you also mentioned having a routine. So really, really great tips.
Yeah, and I think I really love the fact that you're reminding me and folks that these are affordable things. Like you don't need access to a lot of financial resources. And I'm very privileged that I do have access to the resources that, I can access mental health supports and I can pay for them and I have insurance and all that kind of stuff. Like I'm so privileged for that. I think there are, I see every day on Instagram that there are access to affordable kind of therapy options. You can Google cognitive behavioral therapy. You can read about what that is, different modalities, different ways that, cognitive behavioral therapy works. There are therapists that work on sliding scale. I think the thing that I love about the internet is that I can find the answers to the questions that I have, and I can find free resources for just about anything. And so really it's just digging into what what is it that you're looking for, and there's probably going to be free or low cost options out there for you. Absolutely.
And I think also writing your story. I think writing your story can be very therapeutic. I know how I would have written my story 20 or 10 years ago is very different to how I write my story now. Another thing that I do to maintain my wellness is I journal, and I tend to write letters to my mom. So, something happens in my life that's really special that I would love to tell her. I'll write her a story about, or write her a letter telling her about that. And I find that that's really helpful, which leads me into my next question, because this is really an important part of mother loss, is how did the death at an early age impact your view of parenting?
For the longest time, and I have said this to many people, I never expected to be a parent. I didn't think that I was going to have children. And then I met Megan, and she convinced me otherwise. We got married and we've been together for a long time, and we wanted to be parents. I think as so much of my experience with my grief and loss, and maybe this is something that you can relate to Nancy, is that my emotions around it were so mixed. Like, I grieved the fact that my mother would not be there to see me become a mother. And just for those of you listening, I did not carry our children. My partner Megan did. So I didn't have that experience of pregnancy and birth, but I was definitely there through the whole process. But the day our daughter was born, I felt the most overwhelming sense of love I've ever felt in my entire life. I literally didn't know that I could love another person as much as I loved that child the minute she was born. And I write about this too, that the whole in my heart that had been there for a long time after my mom died became a little bit smaller. Actually became a lot smaller, because it was filled with this love that I had for my child. But I grieved the fact that she wasn't there, that she wasn't going to be a grandmother, that she wasn't going to see me as an adult become a mom. So that was one piece of it. The other piece was there were a lot of things that my mom did as a parent that were not good, that were just not great choices, because of her own mental health struggles, because of her own, issues and raising and socialization and everything else, and the generation that she was from. Genuinely mistakes were made. And I just knew that that wasn't the kind of parent that I wanted to be. My mom was super loving and had so many great qualities about her, but had a lot of shortcomings. And so there were a lot of things that I knew with my own child, with our child, that we were going to do differently. And some of that was driven by my own anxiety about, at first it was about dying early. And I had to work through that in therapy. And now it's about being really conscious about how I was raised and some of the messages that were given to me, and not trying to pass those on to my kids. So I'm trying to break a cycle here. And that's also really hard. And it takes a lot of kind of like emotional, mental energy. But that's kind of the work that I'm doing now around being a parent of a 10-year-old, who reminds me a lot of me at that age, and trying not to squish her as I was kind of squished by my parents. So yeah, there's a lot in there, but I think, when you have that early loss of a parent, I've said this many times, and I think people can relate, that person is frozen in time for you, and you're frozen in time for them. Like my mother will always be 49 to me, and I'll always be 18. It's really hard for me that she hasn't seen me as an adult, that we don't have an adult relationship, that I never will have an opportunity to say to her, why did you do this? Why did you make that choice? How come this happened? Explain this to me, as adults. And to have that relationship with my children as well.
Yes, that totally makes sense to me, what you're saying, Janet. Some of the other things that I was thinking about was my role model for a mother was someone who was sick. So I didn't have the role model. I didn't know what a mother was who wasn't impaired by illness. The other thing was, I had questions about myself. When did I first walk? When did I stop breastfeeding? When did I sleep through the night? All those questions were lost. I just really had to set that aside. And the other thing I found, I don't know if you had the shared experience, but I was jealous of my other friends. So if I saw someone walking down the street with who I imagined was their mother, and they had their baby, it just, my insides just clenched, and I just felt this intense grief. It took me a long time, and I still don't know if that's finished, but becoming a parent is definitely a milestone, and very different not having role models or not having that older person to kind of guide you.
Absolutely. I really felt that. I felt that my whole adult life. Every milestone that I would hit, a university graduation, my first job, buying a house, getting married, the fact that my mother wasn't there just gutted me. It really did. It was so hard. And I think what is beautiful and hard at the same time is that I have these in-laws, my partner's parents, who are like the most amazing people and like love me as another daughter. But it always was so hard for me, and I don't think it is now, but certainly when our older daughter was born, like to see Meg and her mom kind of have that shared bonding experience over, Finley's birth and her first steps and, all that kind of stuff. It was hard. It was hard to watch that. I mean, I am eternally grateful that our girls have the grandmothers that they do because they're amazing. But I do feel still grief about the fact that they don't get to know my mom and I don't get to share that experience with her. And I certainly understand and have felt that jealousy and resentment. Absolutely. Absolutely, for sure.
And I really heard you on the part of idolizing your mom as well. I feel that too. My mom, as I said, had mental health struggles, and I don't know if she would have been a grandmother, like a good grandmother had she lived. Yep. Because of mental illness. I don't know if she would have been able to maintain that relationship, but because our relationship was cut off before that, a lot of the negative things kind of fall away, and just this longing and an ideal version exists.
Yeah, I think there's that idealized version of who she would have been or could have been as a grandmother, for sure. I think for me, my struggle really came around not having my own family support through, having children and not having that connection and wanting that connection so badly and thinking, well, it should be like this, right? It should happen like this, or they should want to spend time with me, or we should be able to have this relationship. And it took me so long to realize that the enormous grief and sadness that I felt was the disappointment about that not happening, because it just can't, right? It just isn't possible. So that took me a really long time to process, like, I got to get out of this should kind of idea, because that is really can be really damaging for a person's mental health. It certainly was for mine.
Yes, definitely. I'm looking, and we only have a little bit of time, but there's a couple of questions I want to get in. So it's kind of switching gears here. What have you learned through launching your project?
Oh my gosh, I have learned so many things. I think I've learned about the power of writing and the fact that just sharing my story and openly asking women, hey, do you want to share yours too, is so powerful. It is such a connection point with people that I have never met, I do not know, but I value each one of them so enormously because they have given of themselves this piece of memory, of longing, of grief, of loss, of love, in a public way, and sharing the photos that Julia so beautifully put together, is so profound. And I think that when you read through the stories, you'll see, and I certainly have noticed this, that while we all come from different places, we're different ages, races, cultures, religions, languages, there are common threads through all of these stories, even though all the stories are so different. And I think that to me is just, like, I'm a sociologist kind of by trade. And so for me, I just think that, wow, that is really something that globally we can share these stories and find commonalities and reach out across, the interweb and make these connections. And my dream in a post-COVID world is to be able to bring, all these folks together in a physical space so that we can actually meet each other and have a physical peer kind of connection. I think that would be so profound. I think just to know that my story, and just putting it out there and creating this very simple kind of website, this is a very easy thing to do, has created a platform for other people to feel okay to share theirs, it gives my grief, it feels productive to me. It feels like I'm doing something valuable with the grief that I have suffered and that I have carried with me, instead of just keeping it hidden away like this little piece in the back of my life that nobody talks about and we don't deal with anymore. Because as you say, there's no timeline for grief. Like, the grief just changes and evolves as you change and evolve, and as your life changes and evolves. And I think that that's the piece that is also really profound about connecting with women who have lost their mothers, 5, 10, 15, 25 years, similar as me, women whose mothers died last year, women, people whose mothers died because of COVID, right? That's so profound that we can be at different places in our grieving journey where we can learn from one another and connect and support and say, what you're feeling is so valid and so real. And it's also really normal, just to kind of normalize that. I think it's really profound. Like, that has really touched me in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's what I love.
I love that. And I love the idea of an in-person meeting. 100%. I would love to be there. That just sounds amazing.
Yeah.
The other last question I have is, so how do people submit their stories?
You just, my email address is janetgwilliam36@gmail.com. If you go to the website and you click contact, my email address is there, and you just send me your story in whatever form you want it to take. It can be prose, it can be poetry, it could be stream of consciousness. Like, I don't edit. I edit a little bit for grammar and punctuation. That's it. I don't edit anything else. And any pictures that you'd like me to post, I can post as many as you like. And I usually post 1 to 2 days after I get them, and you just email it to me and I will put it on the website.
That is so amazing. I'm hoping that people who have lost their mothers are listening to this, and I hope eventually they come to the point where they're able to tell their story. I know that I'm still working on that. So thank you so much for being with us today, Janet. We're going to put your contact information. We're going to put a link to your website, and I'm also going to list your wellness tools. I think that's a great resource. So thank you so much for being with us today, Janet.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And thank you to the Royal Ottawa and the Ottawa Birth and Wellness Center. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I hope you're all staying safe and well. So thank you again.